The sun bled crimson over the mesas when the first rope cinched Tomas' wrists. Dust devils spun like restless ghosts across the cracked earth of the Apache camp, and every eye in the circle burned with the same question: why had the white men come alone? Tomas felt the hemp bite into his skin, felt the heat of 100 stares, but he kept his gaze on the girl kneeling 3 paces away. Her name was Nisoni, and her scream still echoed inside his skull: "No maten a mi esposo." The words had torn from her throat the instant the warriors dragged him from his horse, and now they hung in the air like smoke that refused to rise. Tomas had not meant to become Anjone's husband. 6 moons earlier he had been a surveyor from Boston, sent west by a railroad company that measured land in miles and men in dollars. He carried a theodolite, a ledger, and a letter of introduction sealed with wax. The letter was gone now, burned with his saddlebags when the Apaches took his horse. All that remained was the memory of Nisoni's face the night the fever took her little brother. He had found the boy delirious beside a dry arroyo, lips cracked, eyes rolled white. Tomas could have ridden on. The survey route lay 20 miles north. Instead he dismounted, poured the last of his canteen over the child's tongue, and carried him through cactus and creosote until the smoke of cook fires guided him to the wickiups. Nisoni met him at the edge of camp with a rifle older than she was. She did not lower it until the boy whispered her name. That was the first unexpected turn. The white man who should have been an enemy became the only hand steady enough to hold a poultice against infection. Tomas stayed 3 days, grinding willow bark, changing bandages, telling the boy stories of snow that fell so thick in Boston you could lose a church steeple. On the 3rd night the fever broke. The boy slept. Nisoni wept without sound, her tears cutting channels through the dust on her cheeks. When Tomas saddled his horse at dawn, she pressed a turquoise bead into his palm and said, "You gave him back the world. Take this so the world remembers you." He rode away believing the debt was paid. But debts among the Apache are not ledger entries. They are blood and breath. War traveled faster than any pony. The surveyor had saved a child of the Bidanco. Geronimo himself sent runners to find the white man and bring him back, not as prisoner but as guest. Tomas never saw the runners. He was too busy chasing a new survey line across a canyon the maps called empty. The Apaches found him at dusk, rifles across their saddles, faces painted for war. They took his instruments, his horse, his freedom. They did not take his life, because Nisoni stepped between the muzzles and Tomas' chest and claimed him as husband under the old law. The man who saves a child belongs to the child's bloodline until the circle closes. Now the circle had closed in the worst way. A raiding party from a rival band had stolen horses and left 3 Apache warriors dead. The council needed a scapegoat, and a white man trespassing on sacred ground fit the story they wanted to tell. Geronimo sat on a blanket at the head of the circle, his eyes unreadable. The executioner, a giant named Naketatsan, tested the edge of his knife against his thumb. The blood sank. Tomas tested the ropes instead. They held. It tasted iron where he had bitten his tongue. He thought of Boston, of gas lamps and brick row houses, of his motor's voice reading Dickens by the fire. None of it felt real. The only real thing was Nisoni's face, streaked with tears and fury. She spoke first in Apache, rapid and fierce. Tomas caught only fragments: "My brother, the fever, the white man's hands." Then she switched to the Spanish she had learned from traders: "He is not your enemy. He is the reason my brother draws breath. Kill him and you kill the best part of us." A murmur rippled through the circle. Old women nodded, young warriors scowled. Geronimo raised one hand. Silence fell like a blanket. "Words are wind," the chief said in Spanish. "Let the white man speak for himself." Tomas' throat was dust. He swallowed and found a voice he did not recognize. "I came to measure the land," he said. "I leave with a different measurement. Ye have learned that a mile of kindness is longer than any railroad." Laughter snorted from a few throats, quickly stifled. Geronimo's eyes narrowed, but something flickered there: amusement, perhaps, or recognition. Nisoni stepped closer. The guards let her pass. She knelt so her forehead nearly touched Tomas. "Tell them the rest," she whispered. "Tell them why you came back." He had not planned to come back. After the boy recovered, Tomas rode north, filed his report, collected his pay. But every night the turquoise bead burned against his skin. He saw the boy's fever-glazed eyes, heard Nisoni's silent tears. 3 weeks later he resigned by telegram, bought a new horse with his savings, and turned south. He told himself he only wanted to return the bead. The light tasted like ash. I came back, he said aloud, because the bead was heavier than gold. Because a life saved is a debt that grows, not shrinks. Because, his voice cracked. Because I could not leave her to carry the weight alone. Nisoni's hand found his bound ones. Her fingers were calloused from bowstrings and loom, but they trembled. Jerónimo leaned forward. And if we cut you loose, white man, what then? Will you ride east and bring soldiers? Tomás met the chief's gaze. I will ride east and burn every map that calls this land empty. I will tell the railroad the canyon is full, of people, of stories, of children who deserve to grow old. A hush deeper than before settled over the camp. Even the wind held its breath. Then came the second unexpected turn. The boy Tomás had saved, now walking, laughing, alive, pushed through the legs of warriors. It carried something wrapped in buckskin. He laid it at Jerónimo's feet and unwrapped his surveyor's transit, brass gleaming. The boy had polished it with sand and spit until it shone like the sun. I took this from the white man's bags, the boy said. I thought it was magic. It shows the stars where to stand. It turned to Tomás. You said the land speaks if you listen. This listens for you. Jerónimo lifted the instrument. It turned the vernier slowly, sighting along the telescope toward the sacred mountain. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he set the transit down and drew his knife. The crowd gasped. Tomás closed his eyes. But the blade sliced rope, not flesh. The hemp fell away. Blood rushed back into Tomás' hands like wildfire. Jerónimo spoke in Apache, and a translator rendered it into Spanish. The circle closes in balance. A life for a life. The white man saved one of ours. We will not take his. But balance demands more than words. A gesture to the transit. You will teach the boy to read the stars with this. You will stay until the new moon. Then you ride east, but you ride as brother, not surveyor. Tomás rubbed his wrists. The skin was raw, but the pain felt like freedom. He looked at Nisoni. Her eyes shone with something fiercer than tears. That night the camp feasted. Venison and mezcal, sons older than the mountains. Tomás sat between Nisoni and the boy, the transit on his lap like a child's toe. Stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. He taught the boy to level the bubble, to sight Polaris. Each measurement felt like a promise. Days blurred into lessons. Tomás drew maps not of miles but of stories, here the spring where Nisoni's grandmother was born, there the cave where warriors painted lightning. The boy learned quickly. Nisoni learned beside him, her laughter ringing like bells when the plum bob swung through. On the night before the new moon, the third unexpected turn arrived with hoofbeats. A rider came from the north, dusty, half dead, clutching a letter sealed with railroad wax. He had tracked Tomás across 3 territories. The railroad offered a reward for the return of their surveyor and their instrument. Double if he brought Apache scalps. The messenger read the letter aloud in the circle. Silence fell heavier than any before. Jerónimo looked at Tomás. Your people want you back. They measure worth in gold and blood. Tomás stood. The transit was in his hands. He walked to the fire and held the brass over the flames. He mirrored. The crowd watched, breathless. I measure worth differently now, he said. He let the transit fall. Metal hissed against ember. The telescope warped, the compass needle spun wild. When he pulled it out, the instrument was ruined. Gasps turned to murmurs of approval. Nisoni's hand slipped into his. Jerónimo nodded once. Then the circle is complete. At dawn Tomás and Nisoni rode east together, not as prisoner and captor, not as surveyor and savage, but as husband and wife under Apache sky. The boy waved from the ridge until they were specks against the sunrise. In Tomás' pocket the turquoise bead rested warm against his heart, and in Nisoni's hair a new bead gleamed, brass melted and recast, shaped like a tiny star. Years later, when the railroad finally came, it curved wide around the canyon. Engineers muttered about unstable soil, but old Apache women smiled behind their hands. They knew the land had spoken through a white man who learned to listen. And somewhere in Boston a mother kept a letter from her son. I have found the only map that matters. It is drawn in kindness, and it has no borders. The mesas still stand. The wind still carries stories. And if you camp beneath the stars where the transit once burned, you might hear a boy's laughter echoed in the rocks, and a woman's voice calling her husband home. Word count, 3000.